Now I'd like to call Colin McKay from Google.
Thanks very much. It's great to see passion around digital issues and especially Canadian history. And I just want to acknowledge the work that Minister Clement's been doing on open data and Minister Moore on setting an ambitious strategy for the country on digital issues. It's something that on both issues we need a lot of leadership. Minister Clement mentioned our love with wireless, and I've actually got some numbers around that. So we love smartphones. We've actually got the highest penetration of smartphones among any developed nation at 78%, according to one measure. And we check those phones 150 times a day. So I'm reassured in that I'm not the only one with a very short attention span. It's a professional benefit for me. So, and as well, in 2014, we crossed the digital divide. By that I mean we spend more time looking at content online than we do on TVs. And that may be a combination of what we traditionally used to watch on television as well as exclusively digital content. But it's an important marker for the evolution and the penetration of the internet in our daily usage. At Google, how we use technology, content, and personal connections to solve problems is something we think about a lot. And looking around the room, I see a fairly broad demographic distribution. And let's stop and think about how we make decisions. We may think that our decision-making has changed as technology has become ever-present. But in the early 2000s, Procter & Gamble, who manufactures most of the household goods you use on a daily basis, coined a marketing theory called the first moment of truth. And according to them, shoppers make up their mind about a product in 3 to 7 seconds, the time it takes to see a product on a store shelf. And marketers pay a lot of money to have their product placed on shelves at eye level. Think about that the next time you're in a grocery store. And that shouldn't surprise you. But over the past 3 or 4 years, as search capability has improved, smartphones have proliferated, and broadband speeds, wired and wireless, have improved, we've come to expect instant access to information. And that's actually a zero moment of truth. And it's especially true online. 97% of internet users shop for goods and services online before they make a purchase. And retail services are having to adapt to that. I challenge you to test this the next time you're in a Hudson's Bay or Canadian Tire and you feel like you're not being served properly. Take out your phone and start doing price comparison right there in the aisle and see how quickly someone will come to help you. It will be instantaneous because they recognize this zero moment of truth. And this appetite for information is true whether you're looking to buy a new car or to make up your mind on a candidate or issue. So today, people don't go to vote without searching for more information to inform their choice. One survey we ran as a company measured 14.7 different attempts to collect information about an issue or a candidate before a voter made a decision on election day. And that gives campaigns for candidates, issues, or products an extraordinary opportunity. You have the opportunity to reach and shape consumers' impressions at the exact moment they're looking for more information. And I'll use examples from the United States because that's where we've had the most recent and in-depth experience. 2012 was really the first digital election. And let's play a little history here. Remember, 2000 was about a lot of things, the presidential election, but the one thing that remains prominent in my mind at least was hanging paper chads. We're not talking about a digital election. In 2004, Howard Dean's candidacy was sabotaged in part because of his overzealous reaction to a primary result, the infamous Dean Scream. And I just want to underline for you, that was before YouTube. So the creation and propagation of that video was before easily accessible platforms that made it drastically cheap to share that among large crowds. And then in 2012, there was an unprecedented amount of digital engagement across devices, platforms, and organizations. And one of the reasons the Obama campaign was so successful was how quickly it recognized, embraced this revolution, and mobilized its supporters on a campaign and a tactical and a daily basis. Last year in the United Kingdom, we saw a 630% increase in mobile searches related to politics. And the election isn't even until this year. So these are all just indicators of this zero moment of truth, where people are looking for the information and how they're looking to take action. Here in Canada, how to vote was the #1 search in how-to category in Canada last year. So underlining that point once again, I'm threatening to bludgeon you over the head with it. But let's remember, though, that media of some sort has always shaped perception. After all, the walls that used to exist between politicians and the public have now been broken down. And once again, history lesson, let's stop and remember poor Jerry Ford. And that's for just the couple of dozen people that are old enough to remember the politics of the 70s here. The memories of many of us were likely shaped by Chevy Chase playing Jerry Ford on Saturday Night Live, not an actual recollection of the President of the United States. And as I intimated with my discussion of the Howard Dean scream, the creation and distribution of video becomes simpler and cheaper every year. We become accustomed to digital media platforms delivering a constant stream of content to hungry and informed consumers, and everyone in this room included. You're busy generating content even as I speak. I was while I was sitting on the panel, as Ministers Moore and Clement will become upset to realize in a few minutes when they check their Twitter stream. And as politicians, you can use this to your advantage. It's now possible to shape the public's opinion directly through your own controlled feeds. In some cases, you can reach more constituents, filter through your own channels, merging the power of Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, than the traditional news media. And I'll point to a couple of recent examples. The President's State of the Union speech just a few months ago, where if you watched it online, you had a very different experience than if you were watching it over television, because the live-streamed YouTube version of the State of the Union speech had infographics overlaid beside the relevant elements of the speech. So rather than just the reference to individuals in the spectators gallery, there was actually fully laid out infographics about the details of the speech, which gave an extra layer of understanding and interpretation to the speech, and also provided the content to be shared across social media. And then the second example is one I'm quite startled by, which is we have the luxury or the oddity of living in a time when there's two living popes, which is, I think, has only happened once before in history. And they're very different people. Pope Benedict, not a big fan of communication, very traditional man. And the current pope has been doing Google Hangouts. He jumped on Twitter, or someone from his staff jumped on Twitter the first week that he assumed the office, and has been communicating quite widely and in quite a sophisticated manner. And I want you to stop and think about that for a second as we continue to have conversations about whether or not an organization should use social media and to what extent it might actually benefit our political activities, that the Pope of the Catholic Church is using all these tools to quite an effective outcome. So just as politicians have new ways to communicate directly to the public also has new tools for participation, new ways to make their opinions, priorities, and values known to legislators. And as a result, the web is changing policy and political outcomes. About a decade ago, a survey of staffers in Congress revealed that they valued handwritten letters 10 times more than form-generated emails. They simply assumed any electronic communications were the product of astroturfing campaigns devoid of legitimacy. I think the ministers know better what the volume of emails coming to their office and how they balance those between personal communications, but I would say that the landscape has changed. You're still going to have a world where the e-petition system is being used to demand that the government build a Death Star, and you're still going to see political criticism masquerading as satire in videos, memes, and animated GIFs. And I'll just encourage you to go look for a YouTube channel called Bad Lip Reading, which did some satires of Michelle Bachmann and the other candidates in the last presidential campaign for an idea of exactly this point: satire that masquerades as content and it serves as political criticism as well. But technology hasn't just changed the way we campaign and the way we shape policy, it's changed the way voters can participate on election day. Digital tools put a lot of information in voters' fingertips so they can find it on the fly. And at Google, we contribute by providing election information of different types during RIP periods around the world. And there were a lot of elections in the past year that were digital, a good dozen, including India, Brazil, Belgium, Scotland, and the US, where we saw behavior change in a very significant way. In the 2012 elections, some of which I just mentioned, our election products were used over 115 million times. We had 23 million lookups for polling place, ballot, and general voter information, and we had 2.7 billion views of political videos. Just stop to think, the Obama campaign uploaded 10 videos a day, highly targeted, relevant to specific issues and specific geographies, but 10 videos a day, and we're not talking camera phone videos. And this information can be updated in real time when needed. And this is especially important in an election period. What we discovered when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast was that election officials obviously had to move polling places. You know, they were either underwater or didn't have electricity. And we worked with those officials to update the polling place information available in search and available in our products so that voters could use search to find open polling places. And we also found a partner that helped us text polling place information to voters who simply had to send the word "where" to find out where they were going to vote that day. In conclusion, these days, technology and campaign tactics are innovating so quickly that we're forced to rewrite the rule books with every campaign. What worked last year has already moved quite forward, and it's going to demand more resources, more commitment, and understanding this year. And following old habits may feel comfortable and may seem predictable, but these habits assume the campaign's methods of communication, voter preferences, and get-out-the-vote tactics have remained static. It's clear that Canadians, as consumers, citizens, and voters, have come to expect more. We really love these phones, and we want to find out everything through them. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to each of you for your remarks. And I thought I'd just kick off with a sort of a high-level question, and I'm reminding the audience that we'll be coming to you as well for some questions. But from a macro level, how do you feel that technology has changed politics?
Well, of course, it has always been thus, and you know, you read all of the histories and the tomes, and all of the debate, which is quite subtle now, on the Nixon-Kennedy debates in 1960, and how Nixon won the debate on radio and lost it on television. So there's a case of technology and the new application of what we considered an old technology today having an impact on a presidential campaign. So that's for politicians who study these things, that's always the example that always comes up about how technology can change in an instant how someone is viewed. So part of what we do as politicians, I think, how we both react and try to be proactive is, I think it is now incumbent on us, if we want to be successful politicians, successful in our job of projecting ideas and projecting principles, and particularly as conservatives, we have to keep on top of the technology as it moves. And so it is, there are more, I'm on Instagram now, have been for a couple of years, and I'm told that there are more active people on Instagram now than on Twitter. Regardless, it has become part of the table of how I can talk about my day and interact with people that I didn't use 2 years ago. And that's just one example. So, and then I actively observe what other people are doing and how they're doing it. And President Obama is a good case in point, where he's on Reddit all the time, and I don't think we've seen that as much in Canada, as an example. But Google Hangouts, I've deployed those as Treasury Board and as industry minister, and other ways to interact with people that is direct. That's the sweet spot for politicians, when you can have the conversation directly with someone, not only at the door, but using this technology without a filter. Hi media. That's better, and so that's what we're always looking for.
How's your behavior
well,
changed?
on the politics side, I was thinking back actually on the drive over, and I thought, so 1997 was the first Canadian federal election where national political parties had websites. The 2000 election was the first federal election in Canada where individual candidates had some websites. And that was when I first ran for office, and I was one of 2 Canadian Alliance candidates in the province of British Columbia that actually had their own individual website. 2004 was the first national campaign where almost everybody had their own individual website, but they weren't controlled by the party, so people were doing their own thing, and people will remember the dramatic and traumatic, sometimes for parties, stories in the 04 and 06 campaigns where blogs were problematic, of people just telling the world what they thought about what was happening in the world at that moment, which is not a phenomenal campaigning prose, but there you are, and the reeling in of that. 2008 was the first campaign where Facebook was stood up, but it was very rudimentary and nobody really knew what it meant or how to engage it. 2011 was the first campaign where all that stuff was happening, plus Facebook and Twitter was engaged, but it was very rudimentary and people didn't really know how to use it or how to engage it. 2015 is the first campaign where all of that is happening, where people have their own websites, their own Facebook, their own Twitter, and then you add in Instagram, you add in Vine, you add in their own YouTube channels, and the decentralization and the opportunities for the decentralization of the dissemination of information in unique ways for individual candidates in ways that make sense for their districts, particularly rural districts, is never been more liberalized before in Canadian history, which is a great thing. But the challenges and risks for political parties therein is extraordinary. And so to make sure, so you actually have this tearing away, I think, of national campaigns where you have, people are, the Leaders Tour, which goes around, and then you have localized campaigns, which can be incredibly decentralized and localized with specific technologies that make the most sense for a local campaign. And for some, it may be a traditional press release that goes to a local paper that still has circulation, purchase, and readership. And for others, it may be fully engaged in digital technology. But the use of these different tools as modalities to engage voters on a local level, given the diversity of audiences that we're all trying to reach as people seeking public office, has never been more diversified. Now, the opportunity for that is that as the media are finding out that, Frank, not to put too fine a point on it, but broadcasting is dying, narrowcasting is growing. And in politics, therefore, to narrowcast your message, the opportunities are quite self-evident. But there's a whole cohort, perhaps half the public, that isn't engaged in habitual consumption of political and governmental information, and you still have to access them through broadcasting, and you can't ignore that dynamic. And so the challenges of 2015 will be unlike any other campaign before in Canada's history, as on a local and national level, we try to engage in these two different approaches to whole cohorts of Canadian voters.
Let me come back to that in a second, but Colin, just to get your thoughts on technology and politics. What are you holding back? What's it going to look like by the time we have an election?
I think James's mention of control is really important, because as we look at these tools and how they roll out, the ability to be prepared and then react to political opportunities and local circumstances is going to demand preparation. It's going to demand understanding of the tools. And as he was speaking, I was thinking of how the government's currently handling some foreign policy issues online. And we're using tools like BuzzFeed, which 2 years ago was considered quite a joke site, to make some very strong political statements and some strong foreign policy statements to a global audience. And that's because both the bureaucrats and the minister's office understand the tool, understand its impact, and have built the path to rolling out responses on BuzzFeed, responses on Twitter that make an impact. And that's going to be especially important in a campaign. You know, I made the point of underlining how many videos the Obama campaign launched, because that's not something you do on the fly. Your campaign plan has that well in advance, and you understand what are the nuances and the tactics you'll have to apply on a day-to-day basis. And narrowcasting is exactly that. You're going to have the responses in pocket.
Well, let's pick up on that narrowcasting point, because critics will say that, in fact, what social media is allowed for is an opportunity to construct your own echo chambers, that really groupthink is taking place in sort of a mass forum, if you will. And in fact, that the rules of social media contradict the rules of politics. Politics is about discipline. It's about control. It's about top-down. But in fact, social media is, to some extent, about authenticity. It's about a free-for-all. It's about constructive engagement. How do you see those two worlds coming together? Minister?
I don't think it's quite that simple. I think your definitions are very tight, and I think it depends on the context and circumstance. To Colin's point, I think he's right that as you know, for example, Instagram or Twitter comes online, or the perfect example, I think, perhaps was blogs. When they first came in the 04 and 06 national campaigns, they get presented and people use them, and it swings to an extreme where people are talking about their cats and their shirts and all kinds of things. And then it
Careful.
Exactly.
A very young audience.
No, but people putting vacation pictures, and you can kind of get excessive with these things. But then sometimes it yaws back, and people just say, "Well, I'm not going to get involved because there's too much risk there." And then it rattles into a correct moment, and in terms of its application. But all these technologies have done that. Twitter did that, then it settled. All these things do that. So as we go forward, they'll find their settling point. For example, the usefulness of Facebook is very different than the usefulness of Instagram, than is Twitter, than our website. So you broadly put the umbrella of social networking or social media in a box, but the truth is they all have their different engagement purposes and their different audiences, age-wise, cohort-wise, regional-wise, and message-wise. And so they all have their own purpose, and frankly, it's still evolving.
And you spoke about data, and what data is allowing us to do is micro-target these audiences and still try and construct our own networks, if you will. How are you finding things?
Well, I think that, look, every major political party in this campaign is using some elements of big data to craft their message, to target their message, to communicate on particular issues to audiences. Let me put this in a benign way. To audiences that are interested in that particular message. I don't think that's inherently evil, but I think political parties will and should be judged on the broader message as well as the narrow message. So I think that that is still a requirement for a political party that wants to be treated seriously. Having said that, I think that it's still, as James said, we're living in an age where things are changing rapidly. I remember, I will tell you, you talked about echo chamber. You know, in the 2011 election, Twitter to me, I actually de-escalated on Twitter because it just seemed like everybody who was on Twitter in 2011 was in large capital letters for the period of that. I'm thinking to myself, I really don't need this right now. I'm knocking on doors in my riding. So I actually de-escalated. I've observed, I think that medium has toned down a little bit and has gotten a little bit more equilibrium. I mean, there are still nasty people on Twitter, just as there are nasty people anywhere you go in the world, but there are still people who are serious about the issues, and you're using that medium similarly in any other social medium that you're looking at. So these things are still evolving, and you know, we go through various stages as society in trying to find out what this use is. The one benefit, well, I'm sure there's many benefits, but one of the benefits of media, I'm talking about mainstream media now, is they at least have editors. You know, so all those folks in the back there, they have their professional responsibility, but they also have an overseer who ensures that they are serious about their professional responsibility. The one thing about these online these online media that we're talking about now is they don't have any editors on there. That you can just say something, it could be 180 degrees wrong, and it's out there. And how we deal with that as politicians, other than ignoring it, which 9 times out of 10 is the right way, but sometimes these things kind of escalate into this bizarro world where they're saying stuff about you, going, that actually never happened. Like, not even close, right? So I don't know how you deal with irresponsibility online. That's an ongoing debate in our society, I suppose.
I want to remind our audience we've got 4 microphones set up, so if you have a question, please come to one. Colin, I want to ask you about technology and the opportunity to create greater voter participation and turnouts. What have you studied? What have you seen? What are the best practices and examples of how it is we can encourage more people to participate?
Well, I mentioned the number of countries that had elections last year that had some digital component, and there's some core elements to those sort of digital outreach campaigns, and they're around at the outset of the election, a commitment to vote, but then especially using the platform to schedule a reminder to vote, and then to maybe push voters to participate in the election the day of. As well, there's fundamental questions: where to vote, how to vote, polling stations that have traditionally been very difficult. If you didn't find your piece of paper, you were frantically searching for what exactly was your polling station. The ability to surface that information quite easily in search and other vehicles really reduces the barriers to participation, or at least reduces the informational barriers to participation. And then on issues-based advocacy, and then participation in the actual debate around why we're having an election and what the outcome should be, the ability to provide content in a really simple way that engages a voter and then provides them resources to something more detailed, whether it's a party platform or whether it's an advocacy piece, really helps to inform those who have chosen to participate.
How far away are we from online voting?
You'd have to ask Elections Canada. So
do you see it coming?
Estonia does it. You know, they do it for the entire election, you know. And it's one of these things where the traditional arguments around security and it's more an argument around voter identity and voter fraud. Than
But
it is
political parties
technical.
invest a lot of money, as we saw. It's not a partisan shot, as we saw with New Democrats and the election that chose Thomas Mulcair. They had their challenges. Nova Scotia Liberals had challenges with the phone-in voting, so it's not. It has its challenges.
Okay, well, let's take it to the audience. Sir, please. State your name and the question, please.
My name is Mitch Wexler. As someone who is actively involved in narrowcasting and using open data in support of our conservative campaigns with election demographics and data analysis, there's one piece that is missing that I think is critical from the open data offering, and that is the postal codes.
Yeah. I know about this issue.
Yes, and I'm sure you're all aware. So for those who aren't aware, the Canada Post charges exorbitant amounts for postal code boundaries and data, and when one guy wanted to crowdsource that information effectively and offer it for free, there was a big lawsuit. And so I understand that there's probably only so much that you can say given the media's here and whatnot, but why can't the government...
But pull on your right ear.
Right, I'll pull on your left ear afterwards after the session. But why can't the government require its Crown agency to make that data openly available like it is in many other countries, particularly in the U.S.?
Minister? Sounds like a question for
sure.
you.
I've had that discussion, Mitch, and so far have come out on the losing end of it. You're dealing with a corporation that is going through an existential crisis right now, and so they are using every advantage they have to continue to have market share in something. I think that's the reason why the board at Canada Post has taken the position it's taken. I fundamentally believe it's an untenable position over the long run, and I'm hoping that the arc of justice bends towards postal codes.
I guess as taxpayers, we're conflicted, right, on that one?
I just think it's such a rich resource for open data that I think that if we want to be a competitive society and in innovation, well, I'll just keep it at that.
Right. Mitch, thank you for your question. Now over here.
Hi, my name's Kai Nagata, and I was sitting there and I realized that I have an Instagram follower and a Facebook friend on stage, and you guys literally run the country, and I feel like we have this sort of first-name basis relationship, which to my parents' generation is bizarre and mind-blowing, and I think that's really weird. So I'm up on all of your adventures in Muskoka, and James, when you get, when you auction off wireless spectrum or when you get a big bill through, I find out about it on my phone. But you also talk about door knocking.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, and I was just wondering if you could talk about the relationship between digital campaigning and that offline relationship.
Great question.
I feel very passionately about this. I'm sure James does too, but we should not let the aspects of the technology revolution derogate from our responsibility, obligation, and self-interest to have meaningful face-to-face connections with voters. And I have this saying, Goldie, you've known me for 25 years or something, politics is a simple business made complicated by experts. So
like
it's...
Goldie.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I probably ruined your business model. But the more people you talk to, the more people you see face to face, the more friends and family and neighbors you have talking to their friends and family and neighbors, the more votes you get. It's not that difficult a concept.
Who was it at the Oscars that said, pick up the phone?
Pick up the phone.
Politics, when done properly, is a blue-collar endeavor, and there's, I'm sure there are all kinds of candidates who sit in their basements in every party from time to time who have a full display like Matthew Broderick in War Games, and they think that with a couple clicks and cute pictures and this and that they can somehow snooker their way into office. That doesn't work that way. Genuine politics is meeting people, hearing their concerns, hearing their frustrations, hearing their criticism, hopefully assuaging their fears and gaining their confidence. And there is no
Bingo.
Counterbalance to that.
Right, agreed.
Agreed.
Hangouts help, though, at least bridge some of the divides we have because of the size of this country and the geography, perhaps. Colin?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think especially, I feel the same way. And in fact, the second you mentioned my username, he followed me on Twitter. I noticed that. But I feel the same way that, getting back to the earlier question about narrowcasting and filtering, I think it's the inverse in some instances because you have the ability to communicate a broader message to a much larger group. And while you do rely on personal connections, family connections, community connections, to drive the political process, the ability to have those very temporary connections between people with similar interests and similar fascinations is valuable, and it's helping us grow our understanding of how the country works.
Right. Sir?
Thanks. Craig Norm from Langley, BC. Assuming that Bill C-51, I believe, becomes law, that's the anti-terrorism bill, how do you protect us from the person who is in danger of becoming radicalized over the internet, website, whatever, but protect our own civil liberties at the same time?
Who wants at that one? It's a good question. Very topical.
Let's start first.
Well, there's a narrative that is pushed out there, frankly, by explicitly by New Democrats, where they say we shouldn't have to have a trade-off between our rights and our responsibilities to be protected. We agree, and we've arrived at that balance in the legislation. So, I mean, rhetorically, it gets pushed out there as though this is not an everyday consideration of the government. We think we've arrived at that balance. Look, there are sometimes finite rights and a zero-sum game when it comes to crossing a line of being a menace, being a threat to an individual, to a group, to a cohort, to a country. And the authorities, through the courts, with proper constitutional protections, should have the ability to act on reasonable assessments of threat to the public. You know, the first responsibility of the government, before we pave an inch of highway, before we deliver a piece of mail, before we do anything, the first responsibility of the state is to protect people who play by the rules from those who don't. And the expansion of the threat and the snowballing growth of the threat that can be assembled online through digital means is real, and it's in front of us. And the powers that we are proposing in Bill C-51 have been debated for a long time. They've been put forward in a reasonable way. We're having a full hearing, I think, about this in the public sphere, and we have a parliamentary process that is hearing the concerns that have been raised. But we think that the tools that we're putting in the hands of our law enforcement agencies are more than reasonable, have been tried in other jurisdictions, and have been proven to be successful, and we think we need to do what we need to do to protect Canadians.
We've got this big clock running down here, and I see 3 more questions. So if you can get your questions in quickly, we'll try and get some quick responses, and we've got to wrap up before another session here at 4:15. So, sir, please.
So my name is Roy Epen. So in 2006, I got quite fed up with the media and the way they were treating the party that I usually support, which is the Conservatives. So I joined a group of bloggers called the Blogging Tories. I don't blog much anymore. I do a lot of Twitter, but I find Twitter is basically people I know talking to other people I know. What's the next big thing that I should be doing to help the party in the next election?
Colin?
Google Hangouts.
Here's your chance. It's wide open for you.
Google Plus, they need an injection
This
of
is called a
energy.
setup, Colin.
You know, I think it's the intersection of the written word and video and interaction on a real-time basis. And there's a combination of services that can do that. And whether it's you produce custom content through Vine and then distribute it in a rather short clip, or you use Google Hangouts and have an hour-long conversation with your constituents, it's a layered effect and it's multiple tools. It's a sophistication of the approach.
I want to declare here now, I'm not using Tinder, though.
I mean, at the end of the day, what Colin's saying is content still matters, no matter the medium. So, next question, please.
I was going to say that was a fantastic presentation. I caught most of it, except when I was busy posting bits of it on Facebook. So I have to say that the challenge always in delving into deep ideas is when we're half distracted on our phones. The way that I see the world today is my name is Leah Costello. I'm supposed to introduce. The way that I see the world today is that we're discussing the same issues that we were 5 years, 10 years, 50, 100 years ago. And there's the traditional breakdowns between people who like freedom, small c conservatives, liberals who like more government. And the whole conversation has now just been amplified faster and broader because of technology. The concern that I have is that for small c conservative people who I believe tend to come to conclusions by deeper analysis and greater reason and spending longer time with the issues to get to the heart of it, are we going to lose in this argument because of technology? Because the people that tend to go for the things that sound good are now going to have an even easier way of just getting sound bites and forming ideas that are not necessarily reasoned?
Well, that's the 338-seat question. Because I actually really believe that we're going to see in this election coming up, is it going to be glamour politics or is it going to be serious politics? I will declare my bias. I'm in favor of serious politics, and I think that Justin Trudeau represents glamour politics with not a lot of substance. And I believe, I guess this will be on tape somewhere, but I believe that when push comes to shove, Canadians see the position of Prime Minister of Canada as a serious job involving serious people who have a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of compassion. And that's what it's going to take to have all of those things, not just one of those things or two of those things. So I think that that's one of the existential questions of this next election. I have confidence that the public will come to the right result. But it's constantly, I see this, that the Hollywoodization of politics, I think we have to resist that, quite frankly, because the issues are too serious.
Okay, last question.
Hi, my name is Chris Tomelty. I'm from here in Ottawa. Minister Clement talked about the importance of allowing developers to access government data to deliver services to citizens, but in many respects, government websites don't convey information either in kind of a concise, readable manner or at all. Recently, I was frustrated in an attempt to use Stats Canada's website.
Yeah.
And it was just mind-boggling how hard it was to eke. It was like drawing blood from a stone, trying to get any information out of Stats Can's website, where you think that would be the one government agency that would provide easy kind of to access information. Whereas like the UK has developed a new platform for their websites, which is based on Common English, which is based on things that citizens want to find out, about helping them find answers instead of just providing information. What kind of is the government's plan for making its websites more usable?
Let me answer that very quickly. We are instituting Canada.ca, which is a complete overhaul of all of our websites to make it more friendly. We have an inherent, being the guy that worries about the taxpayer and his or her purse on this. When we're forced to have a face-to-face conversation with someone, which we have to do sometimes as a government, and that's all good, that costs $20 per transaction. When we do it by the phone, it costs us $2 by transaction. And when we do it online, it's 20 cents a transaction. So for the taxpayer, there's an inherent interest in being good online. That only works if the citizen is happy at the end of the online experience. If they're unhappy, they're going to either phone or go to the Wicket, which is only available from 9:30 to 4:30, Monday to Thursday somewhere. I mean, that's a ridiculous way to get a government service. So we do have to do better at that. We are curating these sites better. We are making sure that they have more relevant information in formats better. It is happening. It has not been completed yet, but it will be completed and it will be better.
Well, thank you very much to each and every one of you for attending. And obviously, ministers and Colin, we want to thank you for the participation, not virtually, but in real time, real place. And we hope you benefited from this session.